But I think increasingly there is space to be authentic, and just to be yourself. I think in the past, and certainly in the business world, there was real pressure to be a certain kind of person, to dress a certain way, to communicate in a certain way in order to be a leader. And I think that is evaporating fast in a more diverse and a more open business world, actually. And the same is true for conservation. So I would just kind of really encourage people to build on some of those natural skills that I think a lot of women have, and to be confident about being an authentic leader and just being true to yourself.
Welcome to Big Time Sustainability.
Big Time Sustainability is brought to you by Centre for Big Synergy, and it is a United Nations Global Goals initiative.
On this show, global leaders and changemakers tell us how they are combating major challenges like climate change, loss of biodiversity, hunger, poverty, inequality, and many more.
Big Time Sustainability aims to inspire all of us to follow these leaders and act with urgency to create a more sustainable world.
If you are a changemaker or know someone who is making a big difference in their community or globally and should be on this show, please email us at podcast@thebigsynergy.org or visit www.thebigsynergy.org.
Welcome to Big Time Sustainability. You are joined by Dr. Sourav Roy, the CEO of Centre for Big Synergy. And we have a very special guest today, the CEO of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, Beccy Speight. Beccy, we'll just start with asking you a little bit about your journey to be a key sustainability leader in the UK.
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I think I've got a kind of slightly odd trajectory, I would say. So I started off doing an English literature degree, which I really enjoyed. And then I worked in local government for a while, and then I ended up as a management consultant, having done an MBA. And I found that really buzzy and really interesting work. So I worked on a lot of big mergers. When Graham Met and Guinness came together and formed Diageo, I worked on that merger, and Lloyd's TSB, a big banking merger. But at the end of the day, I felt as though I was not achieving something or able to commit myself to something that really mattered to me. So it was buzzy and it was exciting and I was doing well at it. But at the end of the day, what mattered to me was what was happening to our kind of natural world and what was happening to our heritage here in the UK. And that's what made me change and go and work for the National Trust in 2000. And I did that for a while. And then I became the chief executive of the Woodland Trust. And now I'm chief executive of the RSPB. And I think that journey has been all about getting to where I think the real fight is, which is the fight for our natural world because of all the pressures it's facing now. So I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time to try and make a difference.
Great. And so, Beccy, do you have any early inspiration as to, your connection with nature, or, how did you come about finding, what you were lacking in your previous profession, as you just mentioned? Was there one particular moment, or was this sort of a gradual progression for yourself?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, I had a very nature-rich childhood. So I grew up in Dorset on the south coast of England. And my mother loved wildflowers, so we were always being taught the common names of wildflowers on walks and that sort of thing. And my father loved being in the outdoors, so lots of camping and fishing and all that sort of stuff. So I think it was just how I was brought up that I sort of was comfortable in the natural world and loved it. And then I can remember when I was a management consultant one day, I was on my way out to a job and I was on a train. And I can remember just suddenly realizing that it was spring. And I hadn't noticed. I lived in the middle of London. I was, working very, very long hours. And I literally hadn't noticed that spring had sprung. And I looked out of the train doorway and I can remember seeing just the beautiful kind of, hedges and trees and fields going by and just thinking, I can't believe I've not noticed it's spring. And I think that's what really kind of was a moment when I thought I've got to get back to what I really love, which is the natural world.
Great, absolutely great. So, Becky, we'll just ask a little bit more about your journey within RSPB and what it's heading towards right now. I know you had a career shift, as you mentioned, but so how did you find yourself adjusting in this new role or in this new world, so to say, to an extent? And how are you heading this organization? And I presume this is the biggest of its kind in the UK as well.
Yes, we're the biggest nature conservation charity, I think, in the whole of Europe, and certainly globally, we're a really important player as well. We have about 160,000 hectares of land that we manage in the UK, about 200 reserves. And then we work internationally as well, either with our partners at BirdLife International, which is a kind of international organisation that we help found, which brings together all the kind of birding organizations around the world. So we work a lot with them, and then we work independent internationally as well. So places like kind of Gola in Africa and in Sumatra, and then in Kenya. We do have quite a lot going on internationally too. And we have about 1.2 million members. So that support is fantastic to have. And I think, I arrived 4 years ago, and we did a number of things. We kind of came up with a plan for what we wanted to achieve in this decade, so out to 2030, like a lot of organizations did. And we placed ourselves very squarely at the heart of the kind of climate and nature crisis, and that these are two parts of the same issue, really, and they have impact on each other and can help each other in some cases too. So we saw our work very much in that context. And then we came up with 10 very ambitious outcomes that we want to achieve to make our fullest contribution to trying to resolve that crisis. So we've got ambitious outcomes around, what we want to do on UK land, what we want to do on our global holdings, what we want to do in marine. And these are all quite ambitious outcomes. So in order to get there, we said, well, what are the things we need to change about the RSPB if we're going to get there? And there were 6 things that we wanted to change. One was about working at bigger scale and working much more in collaboration with others. So that's been a big change for us. We were doing some of that previously, but we do a lot more of it now. The second was to really have more people supporting the cause of a thriving natural world, and more diverse people too. So that's been another shift that we're trying to make. Another one was to open up new sources of finance for the natural world. And then, we also said that we wanted to be a bolder, more propositional voice around some of the systemic issues we face, and getting some of the kind of policy changes we need globally and domestically in order to achieve those. So quite a lot of change for the RSPB, as well as trying to deliver those quite ambitious outcomes. And we check in on our progress every year. Our last check-in was the spring of 23, and we're making pretty good progress with some of that. I think the more challenging things for us are definitely around the more kind of systemic changes that we need to see. So, for example, around kind of food and farming, that's a huge change that the world needs to make, really, and making sure that we are clear about what our contribution to that is, and being really laser focused on how we deliver that. It's easy to get kind of into all sorts of areas before you know it, and you're kind of dissipating your efforts. So I think just trying to be really laser focused about what we need to contribute is very important to us at the moment.
Right. Becky, I know that obviously you have lots of collaborations ongoing, and I think one of the key ones is BirdLife International.
Yes.
So what are you doing with them? What sort of targets do you have working in collaboration with them?
So BirdLife International is an amazing organisation. We helped found it about 100 years ago, and it was set up really to pull together the efforts of all the kind of local birding organisations in the world. So there are about 120 members, and we're obviously the UK member. And RSPB's contribution is a number of things, really. We help with funding for BirdLife's work around the world. So we're a major contributor of funding, but we're also a really active partner as well. So we do a lot of work that's about helping to build capacity in other birding organisations, other nature organisations around the world. So we will often kind of deliver something in partnership with a number of much smaller BirdLife partners, and through that work we will try and grow their capacity and their ability to be able to take that agenda forward once we kind of pull back from it. So that's a really important part of what we do, I think. And we also do a lot of joint work around things like flyways. So flyways are these kind of global motorways for birds, and there are kind of 6 really important flyways in the world, and we often join up all the BirdLife partners along a particular flyway and try and make interventions and changes to help that flyway really thrive. So it's really a whole variety of stuff. The other thing we do is we do lead the marine programme, and a lot of the work are on marine. And that's been enormously successful in terms of, for example, stopping bycatch, which has had a huge impact on albatross populations, for example. So we work around the world to try and put in place often quite basic changes to the way in which fishing fleets are managed, some of the kind of reporting and monitoring that can go on boats now due to new technology, putting in place quite kind of simple changes to some of the techniques that are used for fishing, and all of that has had a huge impact in terms of bycatch. I think some of the figures that came back from Namibia, for example, were really extraordinary in terms of the reduction in bycatch, which has been an enormous problem for the albatross populations. So, you know, all sorts of stuff really, and BirdLife is a really important partner for us, and I love the way it is kind of ground up. So it's all about working with local partners, equipping local partners, and then joining up to be able to have the impact we need to have.
And Becky, you did mention about agricultural policies and how we do our farming in the UK, and how obviously that affects the wider ecosystem, including birds, obviously. So I'm sure not a lot of people have the time and leisure to understand about this. Would you mind expanding a little bit? Because we obviously go to, either a farm shop or a supermarket, we buy our produce, come back, eat, and that's the end of it. But often we overlook or don't get the opportunity to understand where it comes from and what each and every part of the link, ecosystem does in that process.
Yeah. So, where does this start? Well, it starts really with some of the declines we've seen in the natural world and I'll talk about the UK in particular here. So there's something called the Farmland Bird Index, which looks at how farmland birds are doing. And we've seen a huge decline of about 60% in that index over the last 50 years. So just really big declines. And of course, farming, it occupies about 70% of UK land is farmed land. So, we have to be able to produce food at the same time as creating a thriving natural world on our farmland if we're going to stand any chance of stopping these declines. And we've said in the Environment Act and in our Environment Improvement Plan that we really want to halt these declines and indeed turn them round. So that means that you have to be engaged with farming, and farming is one part of the food system, basically. So there are things like supply chain, things like trade, and all of these things matter globally as well as in the UK domestically. And we have been particularly focused more recently on the changes that have come into the farm payment system, particularly in England, since Brexit, since we left the European Union, and that meant that we pulled out of the kind of European payment scheme for farming, and that was seen as actually an opportunity to create a new farming payment system that would give what we call public money for public goods. So really reward farmers for what they do, not just in terms of food production, which there is a market for, but in terms of stewardship of the land, for nature, for carbon, for all the ecosystem services that we get from our land. And so we've been working really hard to try and make sure that new payment system drives those things. And we're still in the middle of it, really. I think we feel quite worried about it at the moment, but it's not ambitious enough in terms of driving some of the improvements for nature that we need to see. But we will carry on trying to kind of influence that because it's so fundamental to what happens to nature in the UK. It's a really kind of fundamental relationship. And of course, you know, we all buy food, we eat food every day. And it's just such a huge system around the world. I mean, it was interesting, I thought at COP28 this year, you know, the food system got more attention than it has done in previous COPs. And I think the way in which we produce our food globally is going to just become a bigger and bigger issue for us to tackle in terms of trying to tackle climate change and the biodiversity crisis, because they're fundamentally linked.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, we were there as well, and I was speaking on one of the panels for agri-food industry, and we could very easily understand, you know, where we lack. But obviously, it's not a, you know, one-size-fits-all solution that could work. I mean,
No.
it has to be nuanced, and every country, including the UK, should have you know, its own ways around it. And it's an extraordinary system at scale as well. I mean, because of, you know, the huge amount of food produced, wasted, for
Yes.
example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the behavior around food altogether. I think there is scope for evolution for all of those, frankly.
Yes,
Great.
yeah. I think there are a couple of things going on at the moment that I think are quite interesting, though, and do give me some optimism here in the UK. So I think there are an increasing number of farmers who want to do the right thing and want to be able to produce food as well as a kind of thriving natural world, as well as kind of playing their part in the climate crisis. So I go to kind of big meetings that happen here, and they're increasing in numbers in terms of the farmers that are really interested in this and really want to kind of look at proper regenerative farming. So that's quite optimistic, I think, at the moment. And the second thing is just the kind of the dietary changes. So I think, you know, governments have been historically and perhaps understandably very reluctant, you know, politically to get involved in kind of trying to tell people what they should and shouldn't be eating. But I think some of those changes that will be good for the natural world, we're seeing start to happen for health reasons. You know, people are wanting to change how they eat here in the UK for health reasons. So that's kind of a reason for optimism as well. But obviously, again, the issue is very different around the world. So, you know, it's very much not one size fits all. But here in the UK, those two things do give me a sense of optimism at the moment, that that change is coming, you know, whether governments legislate for it or not, change is coming.
Yeah, sure indeed. So Becky, with obviously 2030 not too far away, and all organizations, including yourself, we are trying to do our best to ensure that, you know, we reach there, hit the targets, and do our best in the process. So for RSPB, what are the probably top 3 priorities you have before you reach 2030?
Wow. Well, we have these, I mean, I would say we have these 10 outcomes that we want to hit. If I was to pick 3 of them to be really, really important, I would say definitely the food and farming one, which I've just talked about. So hitting some of the outcomes we have around that and our contribution to pushing that in the right direction. I would say definitely the issue about scale and urgency of response. So those collaborations that I talked about, and making sure that we are playing our part in big collaborations, which are really changing things at scale. So 2 examples I would use for that. One would be something we were involved with around Tristan da Cunha, which is a UK overseas territory in the South Atlantic, and getting a big marine protection zone set up there, which will make an enormous difference. I mean, it's really vast, and that will make an enormous difference. So those big, large-scale collaborations, working with communities to kind of make that change happen, I think that's going to be the second one I would pick. And the third one, I think, would be probably the one around people. So people being engaged and feeling that they want to do something about the natural world and they want to see it restored. And I think the more we can do to drive and help enable that feeling to come to the surface for people, that then has a huge impact and influence on our political systems and will mean that some of the right decisions get made. So those 3 things, I think, are really important. But I want to hit all 10 of those outcomes, I have to say.
Great. Good luck with those. Becky, as you rightly mentioned, obviously, policies are pretty much at the heart of so many things, but so
Mm.
again, also our businesses, because, we are all consumers of one thing or the other. So what gives you hope when you look at policies in general and what businesses are doing,
Yeah.
to understand, like, we're trying to reach the goals from your perspective as a sustainability champion? What are the things that gives you hope?
Well, I think businesses are in a position where they can move much faster than governments around some of this. And I think there are an increasing number of businesses who are looking at climate and nature as big risks to them delivering a successful business into the future. They're really waking up to the fact that they need to tackle the climate crisis, but they also need to tackle the biodiversity crisis. I mean, it's very clear that healthy ecosystems and a healthy natural world underpin so much of what business is about. I think there was a stat I saw that said that I think 55% of businesses around the world, it's calculated, are either wholly or partly dependent on a healthy and natural world. And certainly things like the Dasgupta review, which were commissioned by HM Treasury here, show how much of our economy is completely dependent on a healthy natural world. So I think businesses are smart, businesses are run by smart people, and they're waking up to this. And I can really see businesses starting to take that seriously. So some of the big insurance businesses, for example, are taking that very seriously now. We're working with Co-op, a supermarket chain, which is starting to really want to do something in this arena. So I think the kind of the leading businesses are really starting to do something about this. I think the issue will be at the moment, a lot of it is around kind of voluntary codes. For example, there have been kind of new voluntary codes brought in for biodiversity, and kind of monitoring biodiversity impact for businesses. And I think probably until that becomes a requirement and we get that level playing field for all businesses, it will continue to be just kind of the leading businesses that do it. And we really need to get to a place where they are all doing it. And I think that would make an enormous difference. But I think the SDGs are a really important framework. I mean, I think the SDGs are something universal, consistent, that many businesses are signed up to. And I think they are starting to realize that if they are serious about the SDGs, then they have to be doing something to make those a reality.
Agreed. I think from our presence at COP this year, we did see pretty much, well, if you look at it generally, it seemed like everyone is doing everything right. So there is no need to worry. But then again, when you look at the details, that's where the devil is. So,
Yeah.
but yes, I think the optimism was very clear in the air, and also there were disappointments, but also news or rather good news at COP28. So what all did you find was good for you, Becky, generally speaking? What all did you like?
Yeah, so I think we thought COP28 was a mixed bag for us, I think it was for many people. I mean, one overarching thing for me was just that I think, climate change impacts are really starting to bite around the world now. And I think there is an onus on all of us really to show that, multilateral kind of mechanisms like COP are they may not be perfect, and they aren't, but they're the best thing we've got at the moment to take this conversation and action plan forward on a global level. And so I worry that that the fact that climate change is really starting to bite might overtake that process, because it's quite a slow process, because it needs lots and lots of consensual decision making. And so I worry about that, and I think the onus is on all of us to make COP work as well as it possibly can in the future. But having said that, in terms of COP28, I think we were disappointed, as so many people were, that there wasn't a stronger phase out of fossil fuels. But there is that kind of that win of it being actually in the text for the first time, and that was definitely a significant win. We were pleased, I think, as I said, about the amount of airtime that the food system got. That was a really good step forward, and we were pleased also that some of the global biodiversity framework text that had come through from Coming Montreal was kind of really being incorporated into the COP text as well. So we were pleased about that, but it was a mixed bag, really, I think. And I think COP does have to look at how it is working in order to kind of keep pace with the changes that we're now starting to see around climate change, which really are coming thick and fast now, I think.
Yeah. I totally agree. And obviously, I think it's as you just rightly pointed out in the very beginning, it's that multilateral collaborations and obviously implementation of, where and how these actions or so-called to-dos are getting implemented and the impact of those. But what we have as a and CSO have observed is obviously reporting has improved
Yes.
massively over the last few years. And I think that's the
Yes.
way to go, because at the end of the day, it's all numbers, frankly speaking. But if it's reported in the right way, I think we can have more tabs on implementation and obviously identify the gaps.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
So, Beccy, as a woman in leadership and a sustainability champion, obviously many look up to you as a role model to see how they can follow your footsteps as well. So what would be your advice to them? How do they go about finding a career in this changing world? And with AI, many of the occupations are at stake right now, but obviously AI can perhaps never replace the human empathy for nature as well as for other human beings. So I think the third sector, in general speaking, has a huge potential to attract people who do care about the natural world and other individuals. So what would be your advice to someone who is looking up to you and perhaps is trying to follow your footsteps?
Oh gosh. I think it's first of all just on AI and kind of, and the advances in technology. I mean, I think that can be really, really good for conservation. So, the ability we have now to kind of crunch loads of data and kind of, really kind of do remote monitoring of habitats that we were never able to monitor effectively before. This is all kind of really positive stuff. We just produced something called the State of Nature report here in the UK, which takes data from 70 organisations, thousands of volunteers, and just the increasing ability to be able to crunch that data and know what it's telling us as an evidence base is really, really important. But I have more faith in humanity needing to still be very much involved in trying to tackle the nature crisis. And I think, what would I say? I would say to women, well, first of all, I mean, this is a sweeping generalization, and you must forgive me, anyone listening to this who doesn't agree. But I think women, because of the way in which women are socially conditioned, they do tend to have very good skills around collaboration, communication, empathy, as you were saying. And I think those are skills that are essential if we are going to do these larger scale collaborations, which I was talking about. So I think that's the first thing I would say. But I also think increasingly there is space to be authentic, and just to be yourself. I think in the past, and certainly in the business world, there was real pressure to be a certain kind of person, to dress a certain way, to communicate in a certain way in order to be a leader. And I think that is evaporating fast in a more diverse and a more open business world, actually. And the same is true for conservation. So I would just kind of really encourage people to build on some of those natural skills that I think a lot of women have, and to be confident about being an authentic leader and just being true to yourself. I think that's really important in terms of confidently leading the sector, because we're going into a huge time of uncertainty, right? I think there is more uncertainty in the world now than certainly I have experienced in my lifetime so far. And so being able to navigate in an uncertain and very complex world is going to be really, really important in the future. So I would encourage anyone to be kind of honing those skills, I think, as much as anything else. It's not going to be a command and control world, I don't think.
Great. No, absolutely. And I think you've touched on that very, very, core human qualities, especially around empathy and communication and collaboration. And that was probably one of my messages in one of the Food and Agriculture Forum I joined, where I called upon the food and agricultural industries to compete to collaborate rather than compete to
Yes.
compete. If it's
Yes.
possible, it's easier said than done. But of course, if you look at it from a different evolved view, perhaps, or perspective, I think that would probably make sense.
Yes.
Great. It was a pleasure speaking to you, Beccy. And before we go, obviously, any parting thoughts for our viewers and listeners who do want to make a difference in whatever small or big ways they can to support RSPB?
I would say, I think everyone has agency in this crisis. So I think, we are facing some really big issues. And I think everyone has agency. And I don't think it means that you have to kind of throw everything up in the air and work for a nature conservation organization like I did. That just suited me. But I think, think about the things you can do, the agency you can have in your own life and in your own workplace to really try and get us on the right trajectory going forward as we tackle these huge crises. And I don't think, any change is good. So, don't think I can't make a difference because I'm just one person, etc., etc. I think any change is good. But I think the other thing I would say is think about not only those smaller changes you can make, but how you can make a difference in terms of the systemic changes we need to see. How you can make your voice heard, your political pressure heard to really drive those systemic changes as well. And just in terms of RSPB, I think, joining an organisation like RSPB is a good thing to do. It's a way in which you can use your agency. So it doesn't have to be us, but I would encourage you to find like-minded people that you can join with in order to push for some of those bigger changes, as well as the ones you can make yourself.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Beccy, for joining us today at Big Time Sustainability.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of Big Time Sustainability. Please share, subscribe, and join us again next time.
If you are a change maker or know someone who is making a big difference in their community or globally and should be on this show, please email us at podcast@thebigsynergy.org or visit www.thebigsynergy.org.